Welcome to another episode of the Equip Show. My name is Paul Morris, and I am on the team at Equip Global. It is my great pleasure to have as a guest today Dorian Russell, the Executive Director of HomePlate Youth Services, which is in my hometown of Beaverton, Oregon, and a really phenomenal organization. Dorian, welcome to the Equip Show.
Thank you so much for having me, Paul. And we share hometowns side by side. I'm from Hillsboro, so right back at you.
Fantastic. So we're going to just get right into it. My first question is, tell us about HomePlate Youth Services and, in 30 seconds-ish or whatever, however long you want to take, what it is that y'all do.
Sure. Yeah, well, HomePlate Youth Services uplifts and empowers young people who are experiencing homelessness and housing instability. And we do that through community building, education, and direct access to services and resources. I like to tell people that we are in the business of getting young people housed and keeping young people housed. We do this by envisioning a community where all youth feel a sense of belonging, know that they're valued, and can build the skills and the support systems that, frankly, every human being needs to thrive as an adult. HomePlate was founded in Hillsboro 21 years ago and has long had the motto, meet youth where they're at. And I think everyone on staff at HomePlate takes that phrase really literally, if not existentially. HomePlate in Washington County overall is just one of 3 youth-specific providers doing very different things. And HomePlate is the only countywide provider of street outreach for this age range. And so our teams are quite literally meeting people where they're at, in rural areas, in ex-urban areas, in suburban areas, and urban communities too. And so for any local folks listening, that's from Forest Grove to Hillsboro to Tualatin and everything in between. More holistically than the literally meeting people where they're at. This also means really deep and intentional relationship building, working with 12 through 24-year-olds with professionally trained, trauma-informed staff. And so whether a young person first meets us on street outreach, in our housing program, or at one of our drop-in centers, which are in Hillsboro and Beaverton, they can expect from us, again, meeting them where they're at, wherever they're at in their journey. They can expect compassions for the burdens that they're carrying, and also a sense of co-ownership and belonging. I'll end by saying right now we're serving about 1,000 homeless youth per year, not including the children of those young parents in some cases. And at least in this county, that can look like a lot of different things. Sometimes that looks like unsheltered camping. Sometimes that's young people who are fully employed, but living in their car because they can't maintain rent. Or in some cases, housing instability that can look like a dozen relatives sleeping in shifts and sharing a 1-bedroom apartment because it's the only thing that's affordable.
Right.
So overall at HomePlate, every youth story is so unique, and so are their needs. So we're just proud to meet people where they're at, and our secret sauce is just building a path toward safety and stability together, whatever that means for the individual person.
Right. Wow, that's really phenomenal. And it's HomePlate is, of course, just given its longevity, something that have heard about, seen around, whatnot, but the depth and breadth of your services is something that I certainly did not realize. And there was one follow-up that I wanted to explore a little bit. You mentioned that, like, kind of at the core of what you're doing, it begins with relationship building.
Yes.
And I would imagine that, especially for youth 12 to 24, facing a myriad of challenges, the challenges that you described, that there may not be a lot of trust.
Oh, yeah.
Usually, even with a non-governmental organization, still, I would imagine that building that trust really is where you have to start.
Yeah, I think anyone listening who has parented or supported teenagers can understand the challenge of trust building.
Right.
But for this population in particular, it is absolutely critical for us to lean into that meet youth where they're at motto, because by the time that somebody is interacting with a caseworker from HomePlate, there has been multiple failed relationships, right? We serve the age range of 12 through 24. And if you're experiencing homelessness at that critical stage of human development, there is someone or someone's, whether that's family units, whether that's systems, that have not provided you the care and safety and dignity and respect that that developmental stage desperately needs. So by the time somebody comes to HomePlate, they might have had broken trust and broken relationships with parents, with other caregivers, with law enforcement officers, with folks in government clinics, etc. And so it's absolutely all about trust and relationship building. And that's why we take trauma-informed care so seriously, and are really grateful to be, have the staffing that we do, because you need to get to that psychological and nervous system safety in order for a youth to be vulnerable enough to you to tell you what's going on, to accept help, and also be in the driver's seat and co-participate with you in determining what do they need and where do they want to go. And honestly, you just gave the perfect pitch, Paul, because that's what makes HomePlate successful, is respecting that autonomy and building trust. Because if you don't have that trust, teenagers and young adults are not going to listen to what you tell them to do. It has to be cooperative. It has to be collaborative. It has to be relational.
Yeah, and I would imagine, just kind of continuing along that line, that in building that trust and that being able to develop that relationship, I would imagine that the young people that you're working with then feel a sense of agency and empower, I mean, to use an overused term, a sense of empowerment to actively participate in their own solution building, rather than like a solution being foisted upon them.
Absolutely.
They actually feel like they're, like you said, they're in the driver's seat.
I would say that we are a youth empowerment organization just as much as we are a homeless services organization.
Sure.
I speaking from my own personal viewpoint, I strongly believe that the only way to create solutions that actually last are if you're co-defining the problem that needs to be solved with the person experiencing the problem, or your well-intended solution isn't going to work. And whether that's a nonprofit agency or a federal government or anything in between when it comes to decision making, if you're not accurately defining the problem that needs to be solved, it's not going to work. And so that's part of that cooperation. I think individual folks are their own best experts in their lives and their needs. And that's why HomePlate has worked and why we've gotten so many people housed.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Although I would guess that although at 12 years old, you can become a good self-advocate, you probably still need a little bit of guidance.
To be clear, everyone under 25 needs significant guidance. And when a 12-year-old walks through our doors, that is a very different conversation with different government partners than if a 24-year-old walks through our doors.
Yeah.
But the concept remains largely the same.
Yeah. I was just going to say it, whether 12 or 24, although I mean, I feel some days like even at 53, I might need a little bit extra guidance. They still have the ability to feel safe in their own advocacy and be able to articulate what it is they're wanting and needing to be either pointed in the right direction or on the right path to whatever success may look like for them.
Absolutely. And I think as an ED, I have the honor and the privilege of trying to meet our staff where they're at every day. HomePlate staff meets youth where they're at. And a phrase that I don't remember where I borrowed this from, but something that has stuck with me and that I say all the time is, how can we ensure that folks feel seen, valued, and understood?
Mm-hmm.
How do I ensure that the leaders that I'm mentoring and supporting feel seen, valued, and understood? And how do you go out and provide services, whether you're 12 or 24 or anywhere in between, ensure those folks feel seen, valued, and understood? That's, to me, the basis of a trusting relationship.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So, and that's a great segue to my next question is, we've talked about relationship building and trauma-informed care, but on a more sort of day-to-day, I would love to hear a little bit more on a day-to-day sort of practical or tangible level. What does programming at HomePlate look like, and what are you doing kind of on that day-to-day basis to support the youth that you're working with, or welcome new youth in?
Oh, absolutely. And we're doing that all the time. I will say I'm absolutely grinning here. And I love this question because no 2 days are the same at HomePlate. We're meeting young people, frankly, at the hardest point of their lives. And yet, within our programming, and when we really are able to build relationships with folks over time, there is so much joy. I don't think there's any joy better in the world than watching a young person heal from traumatic circumstances and absolutely bloom into a confident young adult. So typical day, I'll go through 3 of our different programs here. A typical day for folks who work on our housing team, that can look like helping a young person understand, what is a rental or a lease agreement? What am I signing toward? It can be getting them the financial support that they need for a rental deposit to even get housed in the first place. We do a lot of mediation with landlords, for example. We send folks out, even after we get folks housed, we're maintaining a relationship for a while. Again, we want to keep folks housed. It might look like having home visits for folks who are new renters. We help people move in. We help people pick out furniture. I mean, you name it. The folks at HomePlate really try to holistically see you as a person, and that can be a lot of different things. For our housing department, that is the older end of our age range. That's teenagers and early 20-somethings. And I'll note here for any Oregon listeners that the reason that our housing department is successful is only thanks to supportive housing services tax, which was passed in the metro area by voters in 2020. So that's our housing component. Typical day for someone who works team. This is probably the most varied out of all of them, but it'll include any combination of meeting new youth for the first time and supporting those immediate survival needs, as well as youth who we've recently met that are not housed yet. We're really locally famous, at least in Hillsborough and Beaverton and East County and growing countywide, for our neon green backpacks. Like, I'm realizing we've had to replace them in the same color because everyone knows when the neon backpacks come, it's HomePlate. And those backpacks are full of things like food, hygiene items, flyers and information about our services. Our staff are out on regular walking routes in areas of the county where folks tend to kind of congregate, or where we know that folks tend to live unsheltered more. But we also respond to calls from local governments and businesses, and frankly, random concerned community members who would rather see a plainclothed caseworker from HomePlate show up for a young person than calling the police. Sure. I'll say that often folks on street outreach are getting young people signed up for services right there in the field, whether it's services that are provided by HomePlate or getting somebody signed up for Oregon Health Plan health insurance or SNAP nutritional benefits right then and there in the field, like before saying goodbye after nice to meet you. And that's something that I think is incredibly successful on this team. Again, leaning into meet youth where they're at. We will meet you in the field and help you get your basic needs met before, we figure out what your journey is going to be from here. The last department that we have, and really our most low barrier out of all of them compared to outreach, is our drop-in programming. And drop-in programming is in-person services. We offer them in Beaverton and Hillsborough. These are the high traffic public transit accessible areas. And this is about community building more than anything. It's a safe space where folks can come in for a hot meal. They can access human connection. You can access showers, do your laundry, sit down one-on-one with one of our peer support workers or drop-in workers, really start to build that plan of like, hey, what do you need and how can we support you? And, we're really fortunate to also partner with a variety of different agencies and nonprofits who will cycle through and co-locate programming. If we know young people are going to be at HomePlate for drop-in because we have a good vibe, they trust us, we've got the showers, we've got the meals, you're going to get your needs met. Well, when Sequoia Mental Health comes over and their therapists are saying, hey, would you like to do a free intake appointment for mental health services? Like this HomePlate caseworker just got you signed up for OHP. Like I can help you get access to a therapist. We could do that right now if you'd like. Those sorts of co-location partnerships that drop in, again, low barrier. You don't have to sign up for an appointment, like show up as you are. Is also wildly successful. So that's really, to answer your question, what is a day look like? Varies dramatically, but overall, again, lots of different activities related to getting youth housed and keeping them housed, meeting their basic needs, and frankly, just finding youth where they are and making sure that they know they can access support and community. Again, when adults in their lives may have failed them before, HomePlate comes in and tries to offer that repair and healing.
Right. And it sounds like so tangible. I mean, especially I think what was really so interesting to hear about is that your outreach team is like signing youth up for services right then and there. It's not, well, let's
right in the middle of the Winco parking lot. Let's go.
Right. Or, here's a card for, this organization you're going to have to call and maybe get an appointment in 6 weeks or maybe 8 months or whatever. It's that you have built, it sounds to me, that you have built this infrastructure to be able to take action right away. And then I love this idea of co-located services that really, what's the right word? Really illustrate that. You need mental health services. Here's someone right here, low barrier.
Yes.
To get that service right then and there. Like
it's hard enough for teenagers to sign up for appointments and make their appointments even when they're housed and have loving family units and are fully supported, let alone if you're someone who is trying to navigate these very complicated systems on your own. So yes, it's for transition aged youth, absolutely essential.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So of course that then, leads to, I think, the obvious question, and you've answered this already, but what is right in this moment? What's the biggest challenge that you're facing?
I'm actually really glad you asked this question because I think a lot of times people want to only focus on the positive without taking that 10,000-foot view and understanding the direction that we're headed. So thank you. I actually I'm very happy to talk about challenges. I think in this moment, HomePlate's biggest challenge is that youth homelessness in Washington County and in Oregon is increasing while the funding and resources to serve those youth is decreasing. So that's a mismatch. Again, increased number of youth coming to us for services, and we're reducing our funding. And at this point, I think that beyond HomePlate, I think this is homeless services more broadly in the region. We're quietly hitting a crisis point. And I don't want to use that kind of fiery language without intentionality. But the reason I say crisis point is that over the last 3 years, the number of youth coming to HomePlate for services has tripled. And during that same period, we had to reduce our staffing by 1/3 due to resource scarcity. So, not to mention, of the number, we're seeing a tripling in the number of youth coming to us. We're also seeing a lot more high intensity, high needs cases as well. And I'll recommend, I'll say I'm new. I have been at the helm as the second ever executive director for HomePlate just for about a year and a half now. And even still, I am deeply alarmed by the frequency of really abrupt changes in federal policy and federal funding, and all of the spider web there of the myriad impacts that has on state, local, and community systems, structures, and resources. So, biggest challenge, here's 2 examples. Over the last year, I had to make the really challenging decision with my board leadership to close 2 departments at HomePlate. Those 2 departments were our youth employment program and our education program. Not because these programs weren't hitting targets and changing lives and doing good things. These programs are excellent. It was purely due to the volatile and collapsing funding environment. These programs have had long community histories and frankly were highly effective. In fact, HomePlate created these programs at the request of youth we were serving and has co-designed those programs with our youth advisory board. Again, with ensuring that the folks closest to the problem are defining the solutions. We know these programs work. And so for me, coming in and seeing this environment, needing to lay off exceptional staff who have dedicated their careers to connecting young people who are the farthest from opportunity in our community, who finally through HomePlate got to have access to career coaching, paid jobs shadows, apprenticeships, internships, and make meaningful progress on education goals, including HomePlate used to have a Spanish language and an English language GED program. And these were pipeline connections to our partners at PCC and local universities. Challenging. I had to lay off these folks serving this population. That fills me with profound grief. And even if I try to take my interpersonal, heartache from working with these young people every day out of it, when I think on a systems level, we already know that the number one predicting factor, I won't say cause, reading academic papers, the predicting factor that correlates most to long-term chronic adult homelessness is whether someone experienced homelessness as a transition-aged youth. So to me, in closing our employment department and closing our education department, due to lack of funds, not lack of success and outcomes, I think Washington County and the broader community is losing out on an upstream investment. And I think that that's going to haunt us in the long run, especially if this isn't temporary, especially if decision makers continue on the current path and we keep seeing declines in resources. Again, I'm trying to manage through the mismatch,
right?
Increased need, decreasing resources with a deeply marginalized population.
Right.
That's, in summary, the biggest challenge. It's existential. Sorry.
Yeah, well, no, absolutely. And I think, you've really highlighted you're working with an extraordinarily marginalized, and I would say often misperceived population.
We're not perceived.
Right. Or not perceived at all.
There's a lot of folks I talk to in Washington County, they're like, youth homelessness is an issue. I'm like, actually, yeah, the Beaverton School District repeatedly has the distinction of being the highest for K through 12 homelessness in the state. Oregon consistently ranks high for youth homelessness. So it is amazing that it's a quiet and unseen issue for many folks in our community.
Yeah, which then, of course, has the ripple effect of limiting resources, because if it's not perceived, then it's, this is someone else's issue, it's someone else's problem. There are other things to, the competition, like not to get too far down the rabbit hole of competition for resources between, cause areas, but that is a reality. We live, there are finite resources, and if you're not seeing it, it's hard to envision it.
Realize that you need to invest in it. But I think the challenge is folks feel the economic and social pressures of the issue, whether
Right.
or not they recognize that the young person that shows up to work every day on time is brushing their teeth at the Shoot Park Rec Center and living in their car and still hasn't saved up enough for their first apartment, right? Like, I think
Right.
especially, Washington, I grew up in Washington County, and so did you. We like to distinguish ourselves from big city Portland, capital P town, quite a bit. I get it. And at the same time, like, to those folks' credit, homelessness does not look like the stereotypical image that folks in the city center
Right.
may expect. And so when I tell folks what it's like working with youth in rural areas and in the suburbs, folks' eyes get real wide real fast and not realizing the scope and the magnitude. And we also, due to a whole variety of different methodology differences, we're not sure how many homeless youth there are in Washington County. I've seen estimates anywhere from 5,000 to 9,000, depending on the source. Again, HomePlate only serve, I shouldn't say only, we amazingly serve 1,000 youth a year. There's a lot more than that. We're not hitting a fraction of the need, and yet we're going through really significant and challenging reductions that I think is going to exacerbate a multi-generational challenge with homelessness.
Right. And I mean, you said it, you said that what you're offering is an upstream in some of the programming that you're doing. It's an upstream solution that, if invested in, can have very significant downstream impacts, very positive impacts.
In terms of a population, if you
Right.
think in terms of a generation, it's absolutely upstream.
Yeah.
Forget about the micro, like one-to-one individual, he said, she said. I mean, on a population level, this is an upstream investment that changes communities.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see that. And for probably not a huge investment, right? We're not talking,
comparatively, no.
no. Right. Which, yeah. So, thank you for going through that and, and talking very candidly about some of the challenges you face. You're absolutely right. I've worked in the nonprofit space for a long time, and often nonprofit leaders only want to accentuate the positive. There's this fear that you'll be a bummer, right? You'll be labeled as a bummer.
I think that's generational, and I think you're right. Yeah.
And I mean, the challenges, we see the challenges, we might as well name them and recognize that they are there in order to invite solution building.
Absolutely. If we're not defining the problem appropriately, our solutions aren't going to hit the mark.
Right.
I also think the concept of, be positive, don't be a bummer. Like, I will say I am 30 years old. I am often the youngest person in a room by multiple decades. And I work with young people day in and day out. I think we're seeing a generational shift from, as millennials. I don't know if I'm a, very young millennial or a geriatric Gen Z, you decide. But I think the shift to having millennials and Gen Z, and then after that, the young people we're serving now, Gen Alpha, take the helm, is I think that there's a cultural shift happening and realizing that there is power in naming, like you mentioned, and that it is okay to name and talk about the difficult things. And so to me, it's progress to look at both the positivity and celebrate, and also acknowledge and not bury the difficult things that have happened. And luckily, young people continue to amaze me in that way. People younger than me are so down to roll up their sleeves and talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'm here as a elder, I suppose, and I invite all of the elders above me to get down with the youth too, of like, hey, like, let's look at this in a sober way, eyes wide open. And that's part of the healing and acknowledging journey too.
Yeah. Well, and to that end, let's shift the conversation a little bit to the good. And what does and you've talked about this, but would love to hear, maybe you have an example or two that really illustrates the success that home plate is having in this current environment with, like you said, the mismatch of demand and resources, and just kind of where we are. I would love to, I think that would be uh really great to hear, some of those
Success
examples of
stories.
success. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think for anyone that works in social services, the profound level of grief that you carry, and needing to detach and be healthy in a variety of different ways and set good boundaries. But it really is when things do go right and you do see young people overcome so much. And again, I think I said earlier, blossom into
Mhm.
the most compassionate adults. Um, to answer your question really pragmatically, success looks like a lot of different things when you're meeting youth where they're at. But
Mhm.
success can look like the teenager that we met living outside last month who went to the DMV with one of our staff, got their ID that they needed for employment and housing services, also passed their driver's test. They're now a licensed driver. Amazing. Also, way to go to that staff member. um, but now this person is, not only having, they have what they need and are interviewing, but they're also touring apartments this week with someone on our housing team. That's one example of success of like, yeah, last month you were living in a tent and now we've got appointments for looking at apartments. That's success. Success can also look like a really young couple that we met and celebrated and is celebrated on our YouTube, for example, who were living in their car for multiple years, had
Mhm.
no idea that HomePlate existed, were living in their car, raising an infant and a toddler, and then through their early childhood developmental years. And thanks to meeting with somebody from HomePlate on a street outreach shift, participated in most of our programs, signed their first lease together. Dad finished his GED, and everyone now has access to stable nutrition, housing, and healthcare. Heck yeah,
Mhm. You're right.
we're here. And both these youth and their children are so much healthier and better off for it. Success can also look like a much younger demographic, like, for example, meeting a runaway foster care youth
Mhm.
who needed to get out of an abusive situation and had the bravery to tell grown-ups at home plate what was going on. It can look like getting reintegrated in the K through 12 system, in the school with the teacher that she already knows and she already likes, and HomePlate working with the Department of Human Services and mental health care providers to make sure that this child gets the care she needs to recover and also get placed in a safe household after
Right.
experiencing so much. I could go on and on and on because we have such a diversity within a relatively
Sure.
small number of years and an age range. But success really, I think it lives in the youth that HomePlate serves because the work that HomePlate does is saving lives and improving lives. Um, I think,
Yeah.
not to be snarky, but I also think success looks like HomePlate working ourselves out of existence. Like, I would really love it if HomePlate doesn't have to exist someday. Like, hopefully someday we come to the conclusion as a community that youth homelessness should not be a normal thing. It shouldn't be persistent and it shouldn't be chronic.
Right.
But for now,
Right.
the reality that we live in, again, I don't believe that youth homelessness should be a thing. That's against my values. But until the day that we all agree on that, for now, I'm just going to continue celebrating the success that occurs within each youth that we meet. And again, it's their success, it's not our success. Um,
Yeah, yeah, no, I
right.
that really resonates because, what it becomes is, like you said, it's that young person's success, and it is not, check a box, okay, that's success, or press out a widget, that's
Yep.
success. It's getting a driver's license. it's
For
signing.
that youth, it was getting a driver's license.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And, and how enriching is that when, with every young person that you're coming into contact with, that you're serving, that success can be one or many things, many, and some things that, we might take for granted or seem small really are quite big
Yeah,
for
if you've
that
lived
young
outside
person.
for a long time and you have
Right,
no form of ID, how on earth are you going to apply for a job?
right,
You
right,
know, it's
exactly,
things where it's like,
exactly.
oh, duh. But again, individuals are their own best experts in their needs and experiences, and that shows up in the things that we do, like
Right.
that youth getting their driver's license.
And then in that success, now they have the opportunity to take charge of their future success. That's what I'm hearing
Yes.
is,
Yes.
and how
And with
powerful
that
is that?
support and relationship, it's a lot less scary to make an appointment at the DMV and go to a government office and get your number called when you know there's somebody in the waiting room with you who's like, yes, you're in the right place. Yes, you're on the list. And I'm also rooting for you. I will be right here.
Right.
That's,
Yeah. Oh,
you know,
that's really,
most
really great.
teenagers need that, let alone the challenging circumstances that no youth should have to experience that these teenagers are experiencing.
Right.
So
Right.
HomePlate fills that gap.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So shifting a little bit, you talked earlier about the increase in services and the mismatch. I love that term, the mismatch of demand and resources.
Yep.
Would love to hear a little bit more now about kind of what is HomePlate's funding model? Where's money coming? Where is money coming from?
I'm going to choose to laugh instead of cry for this one. And I do think it's a very appropriate and timely question in that every single social services leader that I know is really reevaluating in the current volatile political and economic environment. Again, I mentioned I'm 30. I'm a first-time ED. I'm talking to EDs who have been at this for decades longer than me, and they're saying we haven't seen anything like this. I'm in it with you. I will say HomePlate's funding model has evolved over time and with the times. We were founded 21 years ago with a $3,000 grant and completely volunteer run because folks were realizing and were deeply concerned that there weren't age appropriate options for young people experiencing homelessness. And I think it's really astonishing to see. And also, there's some celebration in there too, in how far a grassroots idea and a scrappy nonprofit grew to become in just 21 years. To answer your question in summary kind of way, nowadays HomePlate has a mix of state grants, regional government grants, and local grants, as well as community and foundation grants. But increasingly, more and more, we're relying on individual and household community generosity as well. We've really been excited by the number of people that have joined our monthly giving program, for example. I do have to say, as times change, as circumstances change, personally, I think that voters adopting the supportive housing services measure in the Portland metro area, so Washington County, Clackamas County, Multnomah County, I'm not exaggerating when I say this is the most and peaceful piece of legislation in the state of Oregon that has occurred during my lifetime. HomePlate would not be getting young people into housing, let alone keeping them in housing, if it wasn't for this corporate and high income earners tax. Period. A lot of us, I pay attention to the headlines. I see a lot of cranky posts and articles about SHS, which tend to come from private interests who don't like paying this relatively new tax.
Sure.
and folks who can afford fancy lobbyists and media teams that small, scrappy nonprofits cannot afford. But if you ask me, and honestly, go ask anyone else in homeless services, at least in Washington County, but I think my Tri-County colleagues would agree, that SHS right now, for where our rate of homelessness has gotten, this is really the backbone that we need to shift the picture on homelessness, not just youth homelessness, over the course of a generation. Just in the year and a half that I've been ED, we've had 17 babies born with roofs over their head, despite their parents being pregnant and homeless before meeting HomePlate, purely thanks to supportive housing services funds.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I had the time and the capacity and the fancy pants PR to share news like, hey, these 17 babies weren't born into homelessness. But we don't. And honestly, frankly, it's a miracle that I'm at this interview, because I think my last time period had 150 hours on it. Like, unless I can fire something off at 3 a.m., it's not going to happen. It's a nice to have for scrappy nonprofits that are using their funding to get people housed and keep them housed. I can't afford the things that private interest groups lobby for. So I just, in summary, I want to stress supportive housing services is a game changer. But also we're diversifying our funding streams, and we're trying to take any support that we can get. And my answer to this is probably going to change every quarter, because that's how volatile the funding landscape is. It is a terrifying time to work in social services, to work as a nonprofit executive. Again, I have a lot of mentors. I'm deeply grateful to the bench of experts that have supported me in my career as a relatively young ED. And it worries me deeply that the more folks I ask for insight, for wisdom, for advice, the more I hear those folks say this is not like anything we've experienced before and we cannot predict, that terrifies me. And I think voters should pay attention.
Yeah, no, I hear that. And as great it sounds to me, supportive housing services gives you a reasonable foundation, but there's so much more that you need to do. You need to evolve. I mean, the volatility, I mean, we see this at Equip. We see, I've seen this several times. I mean, there have been periods of time where it has been volatile, 2006 through 8, with the housing crisis was incredibly volatile. There have been downturns.
Talking to folks who experienced the
But
dot-com
this
bubble,
is
9/11, 2008, the pandemic,
but
folks in the middle of their careers have been through more than previous generations.
Oh yeah.
How many once in a lifetime events are we going to experience? I don't know. As a young millennial, I'm like a dozen. How many more?
Right. Well, no, the volatility.
But this is different. Jokes aside, this is very different. And I'm hearing from seasoned mentors that this is different. And I, in my novice, concur.
Yeah, no, I hear that because it is. I see this daily, just how volatile and how different it is. Okay, so now this is an opportunity to think ahead. So you've been at the helm a little over a year and a half. Where do you, if you're up at 3 a.m. because this is the only time you're going to have to think about this.
I should start a podcast that is just 3 a.m. shower.
Right, at 3 a.m. So 3 a.m., you're thinking about the future of HomePlate. Where do you see HomePlate going, or where do you want to take HomePlate over the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a really sober answer and maybe some different answers. Again, I think younger folks are like, let's be real and direct. I think my response to your question varies widely depending on how multiple layers of elections go this year and in future years. And I don't just mean the midterms. I also mean at the local, regional, and state levels. From my graduate education, from my lived experience, from my professional work, I've come to the conclusion that youth homelessness is a public policy choice. So either we can vote for folks who value community care, who are going to invest in the systems and the resources that young people need to get out of homelessness, or we can vote for folks who still believe that the traumatized youth that we work with, if they just tugged up their bootstraps a little harder, that we wouldn't be in this crisis. I want to be clear. In a nonpartisan way, I am not pointing fingers at certain individuals. I am not pointing fingers at certain parties. This is applicable across the board and frankly at every layer of government. And in the same vein, you know, we've been talking a lot about supportive housing services, and that is a temporary measure. Right now it expires in 2030. And again, there's been a lot of hullabaloo over the last 2 years in particular, from corporations and households that make hundreds of thousands of dollars per year, who don't want to keep paying this tax. And for me, as someone who's been homeless and as someone who is successfully leading a homeless services agency that could do so much more if we had more, I really hope that folks listen up, because at least at HomePlate, you're asking me what the next 3 to 5 years look like. And, you know, with SHS expires in 4 years from now. So if I think 5 years into the future, 5 years from now, if SHS doesn't pass again, I will lay off our whole housing navigation team. I will lay off all of the good folks who track the data that we as an agency need, and I think our community needs to know that what we're doing is effective. I will dramatically, if not entirely, be forced to cut many programs that provide financial assistance, like for rental deposits, for rental education, for moving in support, and the vouchers for housing placements. And this is not just a HomePlate problem. I think for others too, SHS allows homeless services providers to meet people where they are at and solve those problems behind the reasons why they're homeless in the first place. So 2028-ish, that's going to be on the ballot again. Or if decision makers at the metro and somewhat county level decide that they're okay with significantly reducing this high income earner and corporate tax, we're going to see youth homelessness continue to rise at a pace that we cannot keep up with. And we're already not keeping up. Right. I think I oftentimes, you know, again, speaking as HomePlate, I don't get into partisan things, but even in my personal life, I'm not super thrilled about our two-party system or either of those parties. And I talk with people on a spectrum of viewpoints. You know, I grew up here in Washington County, and I also spent a part of my childhood in Yamhill County. And I think as somebody who has experienced such a richness in the diversity of points of view that we have in Washington County and the Tri-County area, my only desire is that people vote like the youth that are being served at HomePlate were their own children. Because if people do that, if people vote as if it was their child that needed services at HomePlate, then I think I see a future wherein in the next 3 to 5 years, HomePlate is actually resourced to do what we do best, where we're getting people housed, where we're building community and we're building skills so that when they become adults, they're self-sufficient and they had that tailored support to get there. Again, to me, it's a no-brainer upstream investment. And that story doesn't always get told. But I think whether you're politically engaged or you're not engaged at all, no matter where you fall on the spectrum, truly, I think there's, again, I think I said hullabaloo.
Yeah.
My Western Washington County is showing. But believe me, we need these funds.
Mhm.
The need is so much greater. This is something that we could really turn around, but isn't going to turn around overnight. It takes consistent and generational investment, and we're not there yet. 5 years of SHS. Yes, I'm so happy that we had those 17 babies born in disabled housing. And we have a line out the door for folks who are next.
Right.
So, where do I see the organization? Depends on how people vote. Multiple layers. Depends on if we solve the funding crisis. And again, that's a systems-wide or sector-wide issue. That's not a HomePlate issue.
Right. Well, and that is, I think, leads into one of the final questions that I have is, how can people support what you're doing? And what I hear loud and clear is that people need to take this issue seriously, and that they can take action in a couple of very simple and tangible ways, one of which is voting.
Yes, if you're eligible to vote.
For a program that is providing a wide array of sort of foundational supports to organizations like HomePlate, other organizations, but that it is a very simple and tangible way to offer that upstream solution for a lot of very, very positive downstream impact.
Yes. And I don't think we've had enough time. I mean, again, building an entirely new system from scratch in the middle of a pandemic and delivering and getting people housed.
Right.
Again, I wish I had a fancy PR team. I don't. But truly, I think the other thing too is for voters to know that local elections matter and local issues more than folks realize.
Sure.
It is
Sure.
voting in your metro election, voting in your county commissioner election, voting in your city council election. And that might not be as, front page as a presidential cycle. But those are the folks that are making policies on whether we're addressing youth homelessness right here in your neighborhood. So yeah, that's a big one. And if you can't vote, or if, for young people listening, if you're not old enough to vote yet, you can also talk to your elected officials, get a meeting with them, send them a postcard, tell them that you as a constituent support the policies that help address youth homelessness. There's lots of ways to engage. I could wax poetic about that for a long time, but I'll stop there.
No, that's really great. Dorian, I am so grateful to you for the work that you are doing here in Washington County, and for taking the time out of your schedule to join me on the show, talk through this issue, share, both the challenges and the successes that HomePlate is having, so that people can really begin, if they're not paying attention, they can begin to pay attention, and they can find themselves in the solution in some meaningful way.
And thank you for raising this. I mean, again, we don't oftentimes have a platform, and so thank you for creating the table and inviting me to it.
Absolutely. Our pleasure. Our pleasure. So just real quickly, if someone is interested in getting more involved, how can they find HomePlate? How can they get a hold of
so many different ways. So many different ways. I would say first, if you are a person of means or you are financially secure, please consider becoming a financial supporter of HomePlate. We do have a monthly auto pay program, or you can make an annual gift. These, it's been individual household donor funds that have really allowed us to fill in these sudden gaps in federal funding for things like basic groceries, so that we can provide youth hot meals, pay our water bills. 1,000 youth taking showers is not free. To pay our trained staff and to make sure that they're trained. And of course, to get the survival supplies to youth who are on the waiting lists in housing programs. I'll also shout out, if you're someone who owns a small business, we have created a sponsorship benefit package, which goes toward our annual gala celebration event, which, mark your calendars, is on April 2nd at the Research Center for the Arts in Beaverton. Again, happy whether you're a mom and pop shop or an international corporation, we can find something that works for you. We're just glad that you want to see folks in your community housed. We also work with businesses and community organizations to do small neighborhood-oriented fundraisers. Again, nothing's too small, nothing's too large. And finally, for anyone listening, you are invited to celebrate with us at our gala. It's an opportunity to hear uplifting stories. Again, the success, what happens when we get young people housed and they have the opportunity to bloom. I'll note that tickets are live on our website, but we very nearly sold out the auditorium last year, so I recommend that you don't wait until April. And then finally, to take the next steps to get a hold of us, please check us out on our website. There's a wealth of information, a lot of topics we didn't cover today. Our website is homeplateyouth.org. Again, that's homeplateyouth.org. If you or someone you know is looking to access services at HomePlate, we have a specific youth line number, and that is 503-567-6591. If you're a community member looking to get involved and this isn't a matter of somebody needing to access services, please call our main line. That's 503-608-7252. And we're always happy to get a note from you in our inbox. And that would be info@homeplateyouth.org. So that's how you can find more. Check us out. We hope you will. We're fighting the good fight, doing the good work, and anything helps. There's power and there is solidarity and community. So thank you for listening to this podcast, and we hope to see you at a HomePlate event in the future.
Well, great. Thanks again, Dorian. We really, really appreciate it. Of course, we'll include your website, your socials in the show notes. Again, thanks so much. And yeah, for all the work that you're doing.
Thanks so much, Paul. This was really a pleasure and a highlight of my week. Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks.